Here we go.
Okay, welcome. This is another interview by Tuntrelife, and we have an amazing guest today, Lynne McTaggart, who most of you probably know, but if you don't, she's the author of 7 books, including the one that we want to mostly talk about here, but also The Field and The Bond. So we'll talk about those briefly also. Lynne's frequently been considered one of the top 100 people, in the New Age movement. She's an amazing, amazing person. So thank you very much for doing this. And how are you tonight?
I am just great. Thank you so much. And I'm very excited to hear that you guys are running a Power of 8 group.
Yes, for over a year, and we've just had some amazing results.
Yeah, like really miracles has happened in this group.
When we first started, I was living in New Jersey and she was living in Norway, and we're talking to you from Norway now. We have since been married, and everyone in the group, we just all became like best friends, and we meet every morning now and do Qigong, together in person. It's just been amazing.
Yeah.
And we've had some pretty amazing healing results for some of the people that we were healing on.
Tell me about a couple of them.
We had a woman like with a torn meniscus, and she hadn't walked like for months, and then she, almost immediately after we did the healing, she started walking again. We had a guy with like some ulcers in his mouth. Almost immediately after we did the healing, they cleared up.
The day after.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so great. That is so great.
We've had some amazing results. We'll talk a little bit about what this is all about for people that don't know, but let's start with kind of some of your background, because I think it's an amazing story, number one, but I think it also gives some credibility to your work. So how did you get interested in all of this from where you started?
Well, I'm not a natural person to get into healing. I started out life as an investigative reporter. My first big book was all about baby selling and, what is often called gray market adoption. It was, this big white collar crime. And I tracked around the world and uncovered a bunch of baby selling rings. So that was what I was interested in doing. When I was involved in writing a biography, I was asked by my publisher to come over to the UK, and I did that and wrote this biography and stayed in the UK. And then we got very interested in writing about health. So my husband and I married a British guy, set up a newsletter called What Doctors Don't Tell You, which looks at what works and what doesn't work in conventional and alternative medicine, mainly what works in alternative medicine and what's safer. So in the course of that, and we look at medical literature all the time, to see what there's, see the real proof about things. In the course of doing that, I kept coming across these really good studies of spiritual healing. And I kept thinking to myself, well, if you can have a thought and think and send it to someone else and make them better, that in itself undermines everything we think about how the world works. So I set myself on a quest to find out why this could be. And I thought it was going to be pretty simple. I would just talk to some frontier physicists, and they would explain to me some of their new discoveries, and I'd write it up, and that would be it. And I thought there might be something like human energy fields. Well, that wasn't what I found at all. What I found is a number of frontier scientists who each had discovered a piece of what compounded into a completely new science, a completely new view of the world. So I wrote that up in the field, and there was a little bit of unfinished business there, which was some very good evidence that consciousness is an actual something with the capacity to change physical matter. So when I published The Field, which was 2001 and 2002 in the US, I was curious about that. And also there had been some things coming out about the law of attraction, manifestation, soon after that, The Secret. And, the investigative reporter in me said, well, wait a minute, how far can we take this? And does it even work at all? What are we talking about? Are we talking about very subtle effects like shifting a quantum particle? Or are we talking about curing cancer with our thoughts? And also what happens when lots of people get together and think the same thing at the same time? So I was curious about testing this, and I figured I had a lot of readers by then. My book, The Field, was in 30 languages. And I knew a lot of these scientists in consciousness research were doing the field. So I thought, well, I'll just put them together and I'll have this giant global laboratory, maybe the biggest one in the world. So that's what we did, but I didn't expect it to work. I expected maybe we'll get some little subtle effects. I was really far from convinced we were going to get any kind of big changes. But we did. It really worked. I've run 33 experiments to date. Everything from lowering violence, well, starting out with seeds, trying to make seeds grow faster and subtle effects on leaves, to purifying water, to lowering violence in war-torn areas, to even healing someone of PTSD. So it really worked. But it was one day, what the reason we got around to Power of Eight was one day I was sitting around thinking, well, maybe I would have run workshops, but how do I scale? I hadn't done this before. I'm not from the personal development background. And so I thought, well, I don't know. I'm sitting there talking to my husband about it. We're kicking around ideas, and I'm saying, I don't know, how am I going to scale this down for workshops? Well, I don't know. Maybe I'll put people in groups of 8 or so and have them send healing intention to some member of the group with a health challenge. And my husband's a great headline writer, so he said, I love it, the Power of 8. And that is literally how it started, by complete accident. We put people in groups in our first workshop in 2008. I thought it would be kind of a nice little feel-good effect, like getting your back rubbed or something. We had people send intention to some member of their group with a health challenge. And the next day they came back to report on it, and we heard stuff like this. It was not a subtle little effect like a back rub. What it was things like, I have cataracts and they're 80% better. I have terrible knee pain from arthritis and it's all gone now. I'm walking normally. I have the best gut I've had for years. I have IBS and it's normal today. My depression feels like it's lifted, and on this went for an hour. And so I was shocked. And I spent a number of years testing this in other workshops again and again. And every single time we would have people in the audience or people in my workshops, or even when I was speaking somewhere and just introducing it and doing a Power of 8, session in the group, in the audience, we'd have instant healings. People who were, healed after 10 minutes of concentrated group intention. And so as my 22-year-old daughter would say, our youngest daughter, WTF, we just didn't know what was going on here. And so it was for many years. And so the book is really an exploration in every way to try to figure out what on earth is going on here.
Yeah.
Well, and that, I know you kind of wrote The Field to explain what is going on here, but what is it that you think is going on here? Why does this work? And we are living evidence that it does work. We have our own group and we've had some amazing results, so we know.
I get incredible results all the time, as do other people. So it's not me that's doing this, it's the group effect. About a month and a half ago, I was speaking at a conference in London, and there was a woman in a wheelchair, I swear to you, with paralyzed from her neck down, so special wheelchair. They all did a big intense intention for her, and she stood up afterward and turned around and talked to everybody. We were just floored, absolutely floored. But this kind of thing is happening all the time. The book really was to explore it. And to be honest, I was really frightened by this when it first happened. And that's why it took me 10 years to write about it. These things first happened in 2008, and I only published the book in late 2017. because I wanted to understand it more. I kept saying, I need more proof. I need to see why this is working. Because, I'm not a healer. I don't have a healer's background, and it's not me. I think it works for a lot of reasons. One is, of course, a group effect. When people, small and large groups, come together, extraordinary things happen. But there's also some big effect of group intention. I've seen it with the intention experiments. One of the real mind-boggling elements that has surpassed our results of those 33 experiments, 29 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. There's no drug out there, pharmaceutical drug, that has that kind of consistent track record. But even more extraordinary was what was happening to the participants. They were getting healed. By participating, say, in a peace intention experiment, their lives were becoming more peaceful. If they participated in a healing experiment, they also were getting healed too. There were extraordinary numbers of people answering surveys that I do after every intention experiment. These are all very, very scientific. And I had thousands of responses time after time of people whose lives had changed. Parents or siblings who hadn't spoken to them for years, suddenly getting in touch. People who, had a terrible situation with their bosses or their coworkers, and that becoming peaceful and happy and resolved. And, that kind of thing with the peace stuff, but also healing. When people participated in a healing experiment, they were healed of their knee pain or their hip pain or their migraines or their cancer. So extraordinary things were going on. So I think it's a group effect, no question. There is a kind of collective sizzle that goes on with groups, a collective effervescence, as Emile Durkheim, the famous French psychologist, put it. There is some sort of peak experience that goes on. Abraham Maslow talked about this, the guy who invented the hierarchy of needs, the famous psychologist. He studied peak experiences and talked about people having these incredible physical effects and mentally feeling they were out of their bodies or at one with the universe, having some blinding epiphany of meaning. People report this over and over again. But I think the real secret sauce is altruism. People getting off of themselves. The fact that you're in a group, you don't just intend for yourself, you're intending for other members of the group, and that seems to be the really big thing that shifts people.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned how you got to the power of 8, but have you done any studies like comparing 8 versus 20 or 8 versus 200? Is there a different effect with larger groups, or maybe you haven't done those types of experiments?
Well, we did one big intention experiment that looked at that. It was a seed experiment trying to make seeds grow faster. And we ran it 6 different times with different sized audiences. So sometimes I ran, and we had 3 control sets of seeds, and then 1 target seed. And what we would do is I'd ask the audience, or my audience over the internet in one instance, to choose one of the sets of seeds. We wouldn't tell the scientists, so they were labeled seeds A, B, C, D. We wouldn't tell them which ones we were intending for. We would intend for that particular photograph that we'd chosen. I had photographs of all 4 sets of seeds. We'd tell the scientists we were done, still not telling them which seeds we sent intention to. They'd plant all 4 sets of seeds and then measure them after 5 days. And every time we ran that experiment, the seeds that were sent intention grew significantly higher than controls. But we had different audiences. We had audiences of 700-800 in Sydney, Australia. I had an audience, a smaller audience of 100 in Rhinebeck, New York. We had 600 in Hilton Head, South Carolina. We had a different size audience in LA, and then we had thousands over the internet. So we had way different sized audiences, and that seemed to make no difference. The only thing that made a difference was one set of seeds grew twice as high as the controls. All of them grew higher than controls significantly, but one was nearly twice as high. And that was the people, the audience that were all healing touch practitioners. So they were used to intending. So I think their experience counted. But in the smaller groups, Power of 8 groups, it works with 5, it works with 12. 8 is really a Goldilocks number. As I told you, it was just by accident that I just said, oh, I don't know, we'll put it in groups of 8 or so. There was no sacred geometry to it, no nothing. And what I've found is many times Power of 8 groups will start with more than 8, or they'll start with less than 8, or they'll start with 8 and then dwindle down to 5, and they still work just as well. So 8 is kind of a Goldilocks figure. You know, it's not too big, it's not too small, it's kind of perfect, but it's not strictly necessary.
Okay, and like we said, we do have our own group. So we have a question from the group. But we also, you do a master class on how to do the groups. And one of our friends is taking that class and is enjoying it. And so if anyone out there, we'll have links to your website, but it is lynnmctaggart.com. We'll have a link to it with the video and also on our website. So if anyone wants to take it, so you can talk about that a little bit if you want, about your class. And
sure.
Also, you could maybe give us like a tip for how to do the healings. That would be great.
Absolutely. In my book, The Power of 8, I wanted everybody to set up groups. And that's why I put it, really, so much of it in the book. So it's available to everyone. Some people want more concentrated instruction, and they want to work with me for an entire year, which is what you do in the master class. So I give 6 concentrated teleseminar, online meetings with the masterclass members. And then we put them into groups of 8 or 12, and they meet. They're asked to meet regularly, usually once a week for an entire year. I also have 4 catch-up calls where, we find out what's giving them difficulty. I give them more information. I give them more tips and things to do. And they get weekly instruction from me for a whole year. And then they meet with each other, as I say, and they report back. I have them report every month. Each person in the master class reports back on how they're doing with their health, their relationships, their finances, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm constantly monitoring them. One thing that people get wrong, as I say, there are some really good tips and some powering up instructions, which were instructions that I originally put together in the Intention Experiment, my second book on the subject, after spending time interviewing and studying many so-called masters of intention, like Qigong masters, master healers, Buddhist monks. And they had a lot of separate things that were particular to their disciplines, but they also had a lot of commonalities. So I distilled those commonalities into a simple program that people can follow. The right times, the right places, the kind of mindset, the mind state, the heart state, all those kinds of things. One thing though, and some of the rudimentaries are in the book, The Power of 8, but one of the key things that people miss is being specific. A lot of people think you send out something general to the universe. Well, like you decide, I want many riches, but you decide what should come to me. Will be or I want to be rich. People will say that, or I want to meet somebody. That's a lot more in my mind like prayer. That's kind of saying, thy will be done. You decide for me, God. Whereas intention, I think, is a very specific request to the universe. And what we have found with our experiments and with our Power of 8 groups is the more specific people are, the better. And they also think they can't mention anything negative, like cancer. Don't mention the cancer. But if you want it to go away, you have to tell the universe you want it to go away. But you can frame it in a way that is, our intention, or my intention, or our intention in the case of a group is that jade doe be permanently, completely, and immediately healed of all cancer in her left breast and any metastases, and be healthy and well in every way. So what we suggest people do is frame it positively, that she'll be free of, she'll be healed of, those kinds of things. But tell the universe what you want. And a lot of people say, I want to be rich. They don't necessarily want lots more things. Most people are happy with, they did a survey in America, and the absolute boundary between happiness and unhappiness is about $75,000 annual income, which is really the difference between being able to pay all your bills and not. That's what people are happy with. Once they can pay all their bills, they're happy. More money after that doesn't give them happiness. But what I find in many cases in my students is they'll say, I want to be rich. But what they really mean is, I hate my job and I want a new one. Or I want more free time to pursue my hobbies. Or I want to only work part-time so I can see my children more or grandchildren. But they don't necessarily want more things and want more money. They want more time and more freedom. So if that's what you want, tell the universe what you want. Yeah. So that would be my #1 recommendation. And focus right in on what you want and be as specific as you can.
Could you tell us a little bit about how has this all affected you and your life? And
oh, goodness. I mean, it's completely affected me. I mean, if I were to have written at 25, what my life was going to be like, I never would have guessed any of this. As I say, I was going to be investigated. I was somebody who was at that time wearing hidden tape recorders and, getting bad guys. I had no idea that I would be involved as a kind of gatekeeper for a major healing modality. But, this was somehow the universe enlisted me to do this. And so I feel like I have this big responsibility. This has been revealed to me in some strange accidental ways. So I need to care for it. I need to make sure it's safe, safeguard it. It doesn't get into the wrong hands. And I need to make sure that the world knows about this and knows how to do this, because it's nothing less than a way that we can all heal ourselves. We see an amazing, miraculous capacity we all have in a small group to heal each other and heal the world.
Yeah. One of the things that I love about your books is, all of the science and studies that you do pack into them. So I was just wondering, do you have like a favorite one that you've done or that you want to share?
I love all my children equally. I mean, for different reasons. I love the field because it was the book that was the hardest to do, because I had to try to see how all these pieces of this scientific puzzle fit. So there were many, many days where I pulled out my hair, wore out my carpet, ignored everything else and everybody else and tried to figure out how this all fit together. And I almost felt, as I wrote in an updated preface, I almost felt like the whole process eventually was happening through me. It was just bizarre where I suddenly found this voice to write about this. And it was very powerful for me personally and really transformed my thinking about a lot of things. I love the intention experiment because it asked a big question, how far can we take this idea that thoughts affect reality? And it brought me into the intention experiments, the experiments themselves. And The Bond was a book about how do we live this? It was really an answer to Darwin, were we meant to be so competitive, or were we meant to live in some sort of oneness? And so I really enjoyed writing that too, because that opened up my eyes to the idea that Darwin was wrong. In every way we were meant to be connected. We are connected. We can't separate ourselves, essentially. We're so connected. And The Power of 8, of course, has a lot of personal stuff in it too. That was really not only about discovering this, but my own transformation in the process. So, you know, that's my most recent child. So I guess I'm really caring for that the most at the moment.
Is there any new children in the making, or what? Any new projects that you're working on right now?
There's a lot of new projects that I'm working on. I've just launched a podcast that is really cool. It's called Living the New Science, and it's how to bring this stuff into your life. And I'm excited about that. That's just started a few months ago. We've had some wonderful response. I'm doing more online courses and working with, you know, I did a Become a Better Healer course for people who are therapists or doctors. And I had doctors and clinicians and nurses and podiatrists and alternative practitioners on the last course we did, because the thinking, it's really become evident to me that the way people frame and think things are really going to affect whether their patients get well or not. And a lot of times they're unconscious about it. So I'm excited about some of those and more advanced classes. A lot of people have asked me for train the trainer courses so that they can teach the power of 8. So I'm working on that now. And yeah, I have another idea for a book. I have a lot of other things to get into place with these things, but I have another book idea that I'd like at some point to pursue. Actually, I had the book idea before the power of 8, but it seemed that I really needed to get that book out. So it jumped the line, it jumped the queue. I think too, I'm very interested now in pushing the boat out with intention experiments. One of the things that happened, as I said, the intention experiments were even more interesting for what happened to the participants, even more than what happened to the targets. Well, one of the more recent ones I did in late 2017, I was very lucky to be able to work with special technology. I was doing a course, an online course in a studio in Southern England where I could broadcast to 10 different locations. As long as the place had a camera there, I would be broadcasted into that conference room. So we had cameras in 8 different Arab countries, 8 different conference rooms in 8 different Arab cities in 8 different Arab countries. And the 9th one was in an auditorium filled with Israeli Jews. So we had Arabs and Jews participating, plus my own audience over the internet. So we set intention to lower violence in a portion of Jerusalem that was suffering from a lot of violence. And the evidence afterwards shows that there was a lowering of violence. That's interesting, but completely not the point of the story. The real interesting thing was what happened with the Israelis and Arabs afterward. The Arabs started saying, "Your God is my God," to the Israelis. The Israelis started crying and saying, "We love you, sister." And it was going back and forth like this amazing love fest. Now, it was so amazing because these are people who have been brought up to think that the other side has horns growing out of their heads. You know, they hate each other. So the big thing we're working on now is planning a big intention experiment that would be live streamed and have cameras all over the world and focus on bringing together 2 sides again. Like I'd like Democrats and Republicans to be on this intention experiment, Brexiteers and Remainers to be on this, you know, people who are polarized be together and see what happens.
Yeah, there is no separation, right? It's just like an illusion, this whole game. So that would be so awesome to see that happening in the world. And things are shifting very quickly now. So yeah.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I wondered for a while why we had this amazing turnaround effect with the intention experiments. And of course, the journalist in me always wants to find out why and find out the scientific evidence. And I came across some really interesting evidence put together by a professor of psychology, Dacher Keltner, at the University of California at Berkeley. He did a really interesting study with his students. he took two big groups of students, and one group was shown pictures like of starving children, you know, the world's victims. The other group were shown pictures that were designed to elicit pride in the students. So they had pictures of the campus at Berkeley, pictures of Berkeley's football team, trouncing Stanford University's team, things like that. And afterward, they showed them a bunch of different pictures of different kinds of people. And group one, the ones who had seen the starving children, they were more likely to be connected with people who were not like them. They were Democrats, they felt connected to Republicans, to the homeless, to prisoners, to poor people, to people who were completely not like them. Whereas the other group, they felt only comfortable and connected to people who were like them or the people they would become, like lawyers, doctors, you know, the big professionals. So when Keltner drilled down further, he realized that getting involved in a compassionate act, like an intention experiment, activates a thing called the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body that starts here in the neck and winds its way through all of the major organs of the body. And it's very much involved in feelings of compassion. You know, when we feel compassionate, this gets turned on. And when that happens, it also makes us feel more connected to all of humanity, not just people like us. So I think that's what happened during the intention experiments. It fired up those vagus nerves and people were able to have the heart leap across the fence and bridge those divides.
This is amazing stuff. Yeah.
Very interesting. That's stuff that we've written about on our website. So
Yes.
very interesting. But I think we're almost out of time
Yeah,
here.
we
So
should let you go, but it's
yes.
been amazing having you here. And
thank you
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. For people who want to be part of our intention experiments or want to find out more about our masterclass, please do visit my website, which is lynnmctaggart.com. And you can find out more things for the masterclass. It'll be kicking off in January. I just do one of those a year. And so you can find out more or sign up for more information. For the intention experiment, that big one with Republicans, Democrats, and all of those divided and polarized societies, we are planning that in a big event sometime next year. So sign up once again on my website and you'll get information about what's happening. And it's a free, of course, for everyone to join.
Sounds awesome. And we will link to it both with this video down below and on the website. And also we'll have links to all the books.
Thank you so much. And thanks for mentioning all of them, all of the children.